Hello, this is Introduction to Psychology, History, and Approaches, Section C lecture. Our prioritized standard is going to be 1D and also 1C. The order represents the way it falls in the notes. Objectively, we're going to compare and contrast the main perspectives that characterize modern psychology. So we talked about history last time. Now we're talking about the modern things they're looking at now. There are currently 9 different main perspectives that characterize modern psychology. The ones we're going to be looking the most at: the biological, developmental, cognitive, psychodynamic, humanistic, behavioral, socio-cultural, evolutionary slash sociobiological, and also trait views. The biological view of psychology searches for the causes of behavior in heredity, in the nervous system, and also the endocrine or hormone system. This viewpoint says that people have complex biological systems that respond to both hereditary and environmental influences, but primary focusing more on the hereditary part of things. They believe behavior is determined by brain structure and chemicals and by inborn responses to external cues for survival and reproduction. Now, the field of neuroscience seeks to explore these different types of processes, attempting to understand how the brain creates thoughts, feelings, motives, consciousness, memories, and other mental processes. So, if you hear neuroscience, that's basically the biological view. The developmental view of psychology emphasizes changes that occur across the lifespan. This viewpoint says that people undergo predictable patterns of change throughout their lives. So much of developmental psychology is actually devoted to investigating child development through examining development of social skills, learning of language, the assimilating to one's culture, but is beginning to look more at the development of teenagers and also adults. Now, talking about developmental view of psychology, they believe behavior is determined by the interaction between heredity programmed in our genes, nature, and also the experiences presented by our environment or nurture. So, the cognitive view of psychology emphasizes mental processes such as learning, memory, perception, and thinking as forms of information processing. They believe behavior is the result of our mental interpretations of our collective experiences. Now, cognitive psychologists study various types of cognitions, things like mental processes involving thinking, memory, sensation, perception, among others. The psychodynamic view of psychology emphasizes the understanding of mental disorders in terms of unconscious needs, desires, memories, and conflict. Now, this viewpoint emphasizes the dark forces in the unconscious mind, popularized by Sigmund Freud. They believe behavior arises from unconscious needs, conflicts, repressed memories, and childhood experiences. So, we'll certainly talk more about Freud later, but basically only some of our consciousness is there, and there's a lot that is below the surface we might not realize is there. The humanistic view of psychology emphasizes human ability, growth potential, and also free will. This viewpoint says that people's actions are largely influenced by our self concept and by our need for personal growth and fulfillment. Now, the term self concept, this refers to how someone thinks about, evaluates, or perceives themselves. So, in this image, is kind of showing like your self concepts, kind of the point where self-esteem, self-image, and ideal self all meet. Humanistic theory focuses on the influence of self-concept, perceptions, and interpersonal relationships, and on the need for personal growth. Now, the behavioral view of psychology, this one finds that the source of our actions in our environmental stimuli, rather than in our inner mental processes. Now, this viewpoint says people's behavior is primarily shaped through learning. So they behave the way they do because they've learned to behave in that manner. They believe behavior acts in accordance with the laws of behavioral learning, where people respond to stimulus cues and also to our history of rewards and punishments. The sociocultural view of psychology emphasizes the importance of social interaction, social learning, and a cultural perspective. This viewpoint says people are social animals, so human behavior must be interpreted in a social context. They believe behavior is heavily influenced by culture, by social norms and expectations, and also by social learning. Now, the term culture, now this is a complex blend of things like language, beliefs, customs, values, and traditions that are developed by a group of people and shared with others in the same environment. So, for instance, like the culture of Oliver Springs would be probably a very different culture than the culture of New York City, as a for instance. The evolutionary or socio-biological view of psychology emphasizes how behavior has developed and adapted over time. This viewpoint applies the evolutionary theories of Charles Darwin to individual behaviors. They believe behavior is going to be determined by natural selection. So beneficial behaviors are the ones that are adopted, while unbeneficial behaviors are the ones that are abandoned. And then the final, we have the trait view of psychology that views behavior and personality as the products of enduring psychological characteristics. Now, this viewpoint says that individual differences among people result from differences in our underlying patterns of stable characteristics, or our traits. They believe behavior results from each person's unique combination of traits. Now, an important viewpoint for those interested in exploring the field of personality is going to be this trait view of psychology. Now, in modern times, psychology has actually been more dominated by biopsychosocial approach that was developed by George Engel and John Romano in 1977, which merges together many of the differing perspectives of psychology. The biopsychosocial approach systematically considers biological, psychological, and also social factors and the complex interactions in understanding these things for our health, illness, and also treatment. The biopsychosocial approach requires consideration of both natural and social sciences. The biopsychosocial approach strives for a more holistic approach by recognizing that each patient has their own unique thoughts, feelings, and history, and that is going to affect their physical and also mental health. The biopsychosocial approach acknowledges that physical and mental health is determined through the complex interaction between biological factors like our genetics and our biochemical processes. Also, psychological factors like our mood, our personality, and our behavior, and also social factors like culture and socioeconomics. As a part of developmental psychology, the biosocial or the biopsychosocial approach allows for an intersection within the natural or within the nature versus nurture debate, which ponders the significance of inherited traits in relation to our learned behaviors. For instance, using this kind of biopsychosocial approach, a person may actually have a genetic predisposition for depression, meaning people in your family have had a history of depression. But you must also have social factors, like things like extreme stress at work or in one's family life, and also psychological factors, possibly perfectionist tendencies, which might actually trigger the genetic code for depression. So just having a family history of depression does not mean every single person is going to have depression. You usually have to have a combination of things come together for that to actually happen. All right, that concludes Introduction to Psychology, History, and Approaches, Section C lecture. Our prioritized standards again were 1D and 1C. And objectively now you can compare and contrast the main perspectives that characterize modern psychology.